The silence of the night carried a strange weight. The sky was filled with stars, yet on the earth below there was a stillness that whispered of an approaching storm. On one side stood the army of Alexander the Great, fewer in number yet unmatched in discipline and resolve. Deep in their hearts they believed that their leader was no ordinary commander, but a man chosen to change the fate of the world. On the other side stretched the vast army of Darius III, his camp spread for miles. Fires burned, tents glowed, and the restless sounds of thousands of horses and war elephants created a low rumble. Everywhere there was a sense of pride in sheer numbers and strength. Darius was confident that by the next day Alexander would be wiped out forever. Alexander moved among his soldiers late into the night. He stopped before each line, looking into their eyes, and told them that though they were outnumbered, their strength was greater than any multitude, for each of their swords was equal to 100. His words lit a fire in their hearts. The soldiers swore that by dawn they would protect their king and their honor with their very lives. In the Persian camp, Darius sat with his generals planning the next day's battle. He ordered the ground leveled so that his war chariots could race freely and crush the enemy. When the sun rose, the two armies faced each other. Darius's army was enormous, a living sea. On his flanks stretched countless cavalry, at the center stood massive infantry blocks, and in the front rolled the deadly scythed chariots. The sight was overwhelming, like a vast ocean about to engulf Alexander's narrow stream. Alexander arranged his men carefully. The phalanx stood at the center, light troops and archers on the left, and on the right his strongest weapon, the companion cavalry, with Alexander himself at their head. He knew that the fate of the battle would be decided there. The battle began with Darius sending forward his chariots. They thundered across the plain, the sharp sides on their wheels glinting in the sun. Many soldiers trembled at the sight, but Alexander had planned for this moment. He ordered his men to open gaps in their ranks. The chariots rushed through the empty spaces, and as soon as they passed, the soldiers closed in from both sides and struck. In moments, many of the deadly chariots were destroyed, their momentum broken. Now the cavalry clash began. Persian horsemen stormed in from both flanks, and soon the battlefield was swallowed in dust. Swords rang, spears shattered, and cries of pain filled the air. Alexander, mounted on his horse Bucephalus, rode forward like a flame, his voice thundering as he urged his men onward. His companions struck the enemy with the fury of a storm. Darius, seeing his cavalry locked in combat, pushed more troops forward. The battlefield became even more chaotic. On one side was the crushing tide of numbers, and on the other was the steel determination of Alexander. Slowly, Alexander extended his right wing further forward, luring the Persians to spread wider in an attempt to encircle him. Believing they had trapped him, they stretched their line too far. That was the moment Alexander had been waiting for. Suddenly, he turned his cavalry inward and a gap yawned open in the Persian ranks. With a roar, Alexander led a lightning charge straight through the opening. The thunder of hooves shook the ground, swords flashed blindingly, and the Macedonian cavalry tore into the heart of the enemy. Darius suddenly found himself in danger. Alexander was advancing directly toward him. His soldiers scattered, panic spreading like fire, and in the choking dust Darius felt fear rising in his chest. He first tried to turn his chariot, but in his panic he could not. Abandoning it, he mounted a horse and fled the field. The moment he fled, the heart of the Persian army broke. The field of Gaugamela was now a vision of blood and dust. The great Persian army that had seemed like an endless ocean only moments before was now collapsing in chaos. Soldiers fight for their king, but when they saw Darius flee, their courage drained away. Some galloped desperately on their horses, some tore off their armor to escape, and some fell to the ground groaning in pain. Amid this chaos, only the shouts of Alexander and his men echoed, rising above the din. Alexander ordered a pursuit. His cavalry stormed in all directions, striking down every cluster of enemy soldiers they encountered. For hours the killing continued. Thousands of Persians were slain, while the rest fled for their lives. Yet Alexander, even in the fury of victory, commanded his men not to break formation in blind pursuit, reminding them that discipline was the key to their strength. His wisdom filled their hearts with even greater confidence. Meanwhile, Darius fled in disgrace. Only a handful of guards remained around him, trying to shield him, but fear was written in his eyes. He knew that his empire was shattered. The mighty Persian dynasty that had ruled for centuries was now falling beneath the feet of a foreign conqueror. Back on the battlefield, Alexander gathered his army. The soldiers rejoiced, shouting his name and surrounding him with cries of triumph. They knew they had changed the course of history. Alexander looked up at the sky and said that victory was not merely the gift of fortune but the reward of effort, discipline, and courage. His words sank into their hearts like fire carved into stone. He then advanced toward Babylon. The city gates opened to him without a fight, the people greeting him not just as a conqueror but as a liberator. From there he took Susa, and finally Persepolis, the very heart of Persia. The treasures of the empire, the wealth of centuries, fell into his hands. The Battle of Gaugamela was not just the victory of one army over another, but the fall of an empire and the birth of another. After that day, the Persian Empire never rose again. Darius continued to flee, until at last he was betrayed and slain by his own men. When Alexander heard of his death, he grieved, for he had wished to face him alive and see him yield in person. But fate had chosen another end. The greatness of Alexander shone brighter after this battle. He was no longer merely the king of Macedonia or the conqueror of Greece, but the ruler of Asia. Even his enemies admitted that he seemed not of ordinary men but chosen by destiny to master the world. The dust that rose from Gaugamela still lingers in the pages of history, for that day was not the clash of two kings alone but the collision of two worlds, in which courage and strategy triumphed over numbers and pride. Thus the battle became eternal in memory. One king's empire lay in ruins, and another's empire rose to touch the heavens. That was the day history itself changed its course.